Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just quickly wanted to say thank you to everyone out there for making the show your first listen here to start off your day. And a reminder that you can find both Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Kings 100% for free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to go and show some support. We would greatly appreciate it. Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't done so already. Follow, again, 100% for free wherever you get your podcasts. I'm the host of Locked On Blackhawks, Jack Bushman, joined by Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings ahead of the matchup later this evening between the Blackhawks and Kings at the United Center. Eddie, how you doing, man? How's the start of the season been treating you out west?
Doing good. It's been an interesting season so far. It's been an interesting start to the season in the NHL so far, and certainly the Blackhawks are a part of that. So I'm not sure I've got a good handle on anything that's going on in hockey at the moment, but it is fun to watch, and it's been interesting to talk about for sure. So it's been a little bit of an up and down season for the Kings so far.
Yeah, it's been a bizarre start for numerous teams across the NHL. As always, a lot of unpredictability. But let's get into the Kings' kind of up and down start that you just referenced. I noticed they're 6-6 through their first 12 games coming into tonight. Seems like, it's been a win and a loss, kind of like they've had their ups and downs. What's gone well for the Kings in their victories, and what's kind of plagued them or hurt them in some of those losses so far?
Well, early in the season, I think there were a lot of things you could chalk up to it being early in the season. Even though a lot of these guys have pretty much played together, there were some players that are taking on bigger roles. A guy like a Gabe Velarde, Quinton Byfield. Obviously, Kevin Fiala was a brand new player. Drew Doughty was coming back after missing most of the season. So even though they're guys that have played together, they didn't play together that much last year, maybe. And so there were some things early on. There were some issues. There were some bad line changes. There were some bad penalties being taken, and just some bad defensive coverage, and some not so great goaltending, at least from one of their goaltenders, Cal Peterson. So things are looking a little bit better of late. They did lose on Tuesday to the Dallas Stars on back-to-back nights. That was following a dominant win in St. Louis. So even recently, that's kind of a little bit of a glimpse into the Kings. As you mentioned, they take a step forward and then maybe another step and then take like a half step back. And then it's been, you don't know what you're going to get on a night to night basis from the Kings. And obviously that's not what you're looking for going forward. You can still chalk it up to being early in the season, but at some point it's not early anymore, right? You can only use that excuse for so long. I think it's getting to the point for Kings fans where it's like, okay, let's start to figure this out, because if we go the full season like this, it probably not is going to end up where we want it to be.
And you just referenced kind of some shaky goaltending play from Cal Peterson. I noticed when looking at some of the numbers, they don't look good for Peterson or Jonathan Quick here thus far. Is that mostly on them, or has it been an issue defensively for this team through the first 12 games? What's kind of been the problem there?
Yeah, I think neither one of those goaltenders are elite goaltenders by any stretch. I know Jonathan Quick is a future Hall of Famer, but he's obviously on the downside. He's a guy who's going to battle every night and is going to give you everything he has, but he's a C+, B- at goalie at best at this point. But he's been the best option for the Kings. There's no doubt about it. Going into last season, there was a hope that it would be kind of a shared net, and they tried that for a while, but Cal Peterson just didn't get the job done, especially late in the year. And at the end of the year, it was completely Jonathan Quick's job. They wanted that same kind of situation going into this season. Cal Peterson got a little bit dinged up in the preseason, didn't get quite the work in that he wanted, and then he's gotten off to a rough start to start the season. He's trying to figure things out. He actually didn't play that bad of a game in Dallas on Tuesday, even though he allowed 5 goals. It was more on the defense. So I would say overall, the goaltending has been not up to par, but I think the defense has been the bigger issue. I think the team defense for the Kings, which is what they were really good at last year, hasn't been there. And the offense has been a lot better than last year. So I think offensively, the power play is a little bit better. That's what we were expecting. But we thought as Kings fans, the defense would be there. That was there last year. And so far it hasn't been. But the goaltending, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, the defense really last year was, I felt, at least from an outsider perspective, what really carried the Kings into the playoffs and gave the Edmonton Oilers a heck of a run in that first round series. You just mentioned the offense has been looking really good here to open up the season. Coming into this matchup, they're 8th in the NHL in goals per game. Talk to me about what's gone well for this offense so far, and also what forward combinations can us Blackhawks fans expect to see tonight at the United Center?
Well, Kings have actually made a change to their top line. Going into the season, we all expected it to be Adrian Kempe, Andre Kopitar, and the new addition, Kevin Fiala. And it was that for most of the season. But lately, they have actually, I don't know if you want to call it a demotion, or if you want to call it just the reality of the situation with Gabe Vilardi. I don't know if how many Blackhawks fans are familiar with him, former first round pick, a guy who's had some injury issues. I thought this year was a big crossroads season for him. They signed him to a 1-year deal in the offseason. He's made a transition from center to wing, and he has exploded on the scene this year. He's got 8 goals on the season. Going into last night's Tuesday night's game, he was one behind Connor McDavid for the NHL goal scoring lead. So he's been moved up to the top line because he's playing so well. And so they moved Kevin Fiala down to the third line. But he's actually excelled at that. He's really taken off since he's been moved down to the third line. I don't know if it's more of a situation where he feels like I'm the number one option on the third line, whereas on the top line, he was kind of sharing that duties or maybe being a little bit more unselfish. I don't know what it is, but he's really taken to that third line role and has really been playing well. So a new first line for the Kings, with Gabe Vilardi having a great season, and then Kevin Fiala shifting down to the third line and actually doing pretty well there as well.
And then the last question I have for you is I got to talk to you or ask you about some of the top end young talent that the Kings now have on their NHL roster. Of course, Quinton Byfield's there. Brandt Clarke has made the NHL team and he's going to stay up, correct?
It looks like it. They haven't officially made the announcement, but if he's in the lineup against you guys, that's 10 games and he's staying up.
Yeah. And then there's Kaliev. There's also Alex Turcotte, who, of course, the Blackhawks potentially could have picked with the 3rd overall selection back in 2019. Talk to me about this next wave of Kings players, because it feels like they're a team who they have some guys who are obviously cemented here already and still some of the veterans too, but they also have one of the better prospect pools in the NHL. Talk to me about how those young players have fared so far this season. And then also for Alex Turcotte, more of a bigger spectrum. How have you felt about him as a prospect so far? I know he hasn't really done much at the NHL yet. Talk to me about how his progression's been.
Well, I'll start with Alex. It's been one disappointment after another because of his health, and he's had multiple concussions. He had 2 last year playing in the AHL, and he has not been able to do anything at the development level this offseason. He was on the initial roster for rookie camp, and we were all very excited thinking, oh, good. He failed his physical, didn't take part in training camp, is not playing right now in the AHL. So it's really unfortunate for a very talented young man who just can't get on the ice because of concussions. And with those things, there have been players who, you get one and you're able to come back in a few weeks and you can keep playing. And then there's other players, you get 1 or 2 and you're out for months and months. And so he's completely in limbo at this point. We're just keeping our fingers crossed he can just get on the ice and then see what he can do. But at this point, I think you honestly have to wonder if he's ever going to be able to have a career. I mean, he certainly isn't given any indications that he's not going to try and resume his career. But like I said, he's had no hockey activity all summer, and there's no indication it's going to start anytime soon. So it's completely up in the air with him, which is too bad because he's a really talented young player. But Quinton Byfield did not make the road trip. He has an illness. So he will not be in Chicago unless something changes that I don't know about, but he did not play in Dallas or in St. Louis. And again, he didn't make the trip. And I think the way Rasmus Kupari, a young player they've called up, has been playing in his place on the third line at center, they might want to let him just go ahead and get fully healed up because Kupari actually has been playing really well of late. But Quinton Byfield, I think I talked about Gabe Vilardi, and I think there's some couple of examples with the Kings prospects that I think Kings fans should go ahead and just maybe be on the patient side. Adrian Kempe was a guy that took a couple extra years before he finally exploded last season. Gabe Velarde appears to be on that same track. There were a lot of Kings fans saying this guy's a bust. He's never going to be anything. Well, he's burst onto the scene this year. So I think Kings fans should keep that in mind when they try and look and critique Quinton Byfield. It might take a little bit longer than you want. And I know he was the second overall pick. And I know Tim Stützle, who was taken after him in Ottawa, is having a great start to his career. But just remember, maybe it takes a little bit longer for some guys. And we've seen two great examples of it with Adrian Kempe and so far with Gabe Velarde. So Quinton Byfield might take a little bit longer than Kings fans want, but I think they should be a little bit more patient. You mentioned Arthur Kaliyev. He's not quite the superstar prospect, but he has an above average NHL shot, and he's playing as kind of the primary offensive weapon on the second power play unit. Great shot. He's a guy, when he gets it, he's going to shoot it. And he's a pretty good looking prospect as well.
Well, us Blackhawks fans, or at least I hope the Blackhawks fans out there listening, will understand that patient approach that you just preached, because it's something that's kind of, I feel like, hurt this team and kind of the stigma around some of their prospects in the last few years, because they didn't burst out as a 19-year-old and become studs. And I hate that about prospects and how fans expect them to just jump on the scene and everybody to make an impact right away. It's just not realistic. And sometimes you got to keep in mind that other players develop at different rates, and good things can happen if you keep that patient approach. So hope all the Blackhawks fans out there listening to that take it to heart. We certainly know what that feels like. Well, thank you, Eddie, so much for all that insight on the Kings ahead of this matchup, man. Coming up in just a second, I will turn it over to you to ask me some questions about the Chicago Blackhawks. But first, I got to talk to all the listeners out there about BetOnline. BetOnline is the #1 source for all pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all of the latest developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts on whatever game you want to place a wager on. BetOnline is also your continued source for all sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and game scores. It's both the fastest and the easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including the MLB, NHL, NBA, boxing, UFC, and even golf. So head on over to the website right now, or you can also use your mobile device to learn more about all of the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, back here for segment 2 of today's show. Turning it over to Eddie to ask me some questions about the Chicago Blackhawks. Floor is yours.
Well, I mean, I think the obvious question is the Blackhawks are a lot more competitive than we thought they would be. I mean, we've seen some of the teams that are quote unquote in the full rebuild. Arizona, is having their tough times, but Montreal actually is being competitive as well. But I said in the offseason when talking to some friends about the Blackhawks, I'll give them credit. They're going full in on the rebuild. They're blowing it up and then some. So I guess the first question is, how are the Blackhawks being so competitive at this point?
Yeah, it looked like heading into the season on paper, they just weren't going to be able to compete or keep up with, especially some of the premier teams in the NHL. But they've done the exact opposite through their first 10 games. Every night, they've been competitive. Like, they've lost 4 in a row here, Eddie. They started off 4-2-0 through their first 6. They've now dropped 4 consecutive games. They've all been essentially 1-goal games. They lost 6-5 to the Edmonton Oilers last week, 2 games over the weekend in overtime to the Buffalo Sabres and the Minnesota Wild, and then essentially had a 1-goal game on Tuesday against the New York Islanders until they hit the empty net. So some good teams in there, and the Blackhawks have hung right in there with them. And I really got to give a lot of credit to Blackhawks head coach Luke Richardson. I think everyone's thrilled with the job that he's done in his first 10 games as an NHL head coach. The players seem to be responding well to everything that he preaches. And, heading into this year, we heard a ton of good things, only good things really, about Luke Richardson from Montreal Canadiens fans, where he was an assistant coach before this, or former players who had played with Luke Richardson. And we only heard good things about him, and I have no bad things to say thus far. He's pushed all the right buttons. The structure that he's gone with defensively, the Blackhawks, they're not a strong team on defense, especially now with their anchor Seth Jones being out for 3 to 4 weeks due to a thumb injury, which is a really costly blow. But they still have, they're not playing perfect hockey. They're still their blunders, but it's not tumbleweeding the wrong way like it did last year. And it seems like they've responded well whenever they've faced adversity. And during their winning streak, when they won 4 games in a row prior to this losing skid, they were, again, in a lot of close games. And in the third period, that's when they were playing their best hockey. And that's what was leading to them coming away with 2 points. So the energy and the intensity, it's been there every night. And that's definitely a mentality that us Blackhawks fans can get behind. We know the losses, it's probably going to look more like it is now than it was to open up the season. The losses are going to come, especially with this team being so thin. Both their NHL goalies are hurt right now too. But we can live with the result if the effort is there night in and night out. And it's been through the first 10 games. So I have no reason not to be ecstatic. I would not have guessed that the Blackhawks would be 4-4-2 through their first 10 games and have the same record as the Toronto Maple Leafs, Eddie.
Well, I'm sure the Maple Leafs fans would agree with that as well.
I had to throw that little jab in there.
It's hard not to, let's be honest. So I have to ask you this. Do you think the organization is excited about the way things have gone so far? Because, no teams are going to admit they're trying to lose, but based on the moves they've made, they're not looking to be competitive at this point. They're looking to not do well and to be able to get draft picks, and obviously draft picks in a very high position. So do you think that the organization is actually okay with the way this thing is started? Are they like, what's going on here?
I'm sure it's having GM Kyle Davidson a little bit torn. One thing that probably is making it a little bit easier for him is, again, I just referenced all the good stuff about Luke Richardson. We're only 10 games into his tenure as head coach, but it feels like he's the right guy for at least this job right now. And the players all have only said good things. Max Domi, this is something I've talked about a lot on my show. Max Domi talked about how this was the most fun training camp of his entire life. And I was like, really? This Chicago Blackhawks team that's not going to come close to sniffing the playoff? This is the most fun you're having in training camp? But we've heard that from Tyler Johnson. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews have said good things about Richardson. So I feel like Kyle Davidson, knowing that it sure looks like he made the right decision with the head coach, that might make it a little bit easier and might make it more acceptable here. But it's odd for sure. I feel like things are definitely going to flatten themselves out. The Blackhawks are going to drop as we've seen them do for the past week or so now. One thing I will say that's working in their favor, though, is they already have 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks in each of the next 2 NHL drafts. And guy like Andreas Athanasiou, Max Domi, I don't know if they're going to command those high of picks, but there's an opportunity for not just those 2, but a lot of these guys on the Blackhawks roster to be moved. If they're willing to trade Alex DeBrincat, there's going to be guys that they're going to be pushing out. And then there's obviously the 2 big ones, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. If the Blackhawks do decide to part ways with them, or I guess it's more so going to be Kane and Toews deciding to part ways with the Blackhawks, doesn't sound like the front office is going to ask them to waive their no movement clauses. It's fully going to be those 2's decision. But the way Jonathan Toews has been playing so far this year, he's got 6 goals in his first 10 games, 6-game point streak right now, winning over 60% of his faceoffs. He's been tremendous. I don't know what the trade value is going to be for him, but you got to think if Patrick Kane's getting moved, he's going to get a pretty hefty return. So one way or the other, the Blackhawks are going to be loading up on draft capital here in the next few years. Would it be amazing to go and add a franchise-altering player like Connor Bedard or Adam Fantilli, who's lighting it up for Michigan so far as a freshman? Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's still the goal. And I think it's going to be a goal regardless because of how the Blackhawks are going to ship pieces away at the deadline, and the team's going to be even worse in the second half. But it's tough. Like you never can complain about winning, especially with a team that hasn't done a whole lot of that the past 4 seasons. I'm never going to complain about winning, but it definitely, if this continues for another 10, 15 games, I think there is start of like a more serious conversation and a more serious thought being on Kyle Davidson's mind about that topic.
So I assume that Kane and Toews are saying all the right things at this point, but what's your feeling about if the season goes along and the Blackhawks kind of end up where we think they will? At what point will those guys say, you know what, I'd like to say, I'd like to see a new team. I like to go somewhere and play some meaningful games.
Yeah, it's been a lot of hockey talk so far throughout the
Mm-hmm.
season. I'm just focused on being here, right now, trying to win games for this team, play at my best. They haven't said anything, and it sounds like, again, the Blackhawks aren't going to be the ones initiating that conversation. Sounds like Kane and Taves, whatever they want to do, the Blackhawks are going to abide by, which it makes sense. They've done, they're franchise icons forever, and they've what they've done for this city. They'll go down in history, so they deserve that respect. The one thing I do feel like, though, is, again, especially if the Blackhawks aren't as bad as we all expected them to be, I feel like there is going to be, at some point, there's going to be some pressure on the front office to come up with a decision. And I feel like more so than not, it's going to be to trade them because of the opportunity to get something in return and help that future wave. And that's really what this rebuild is about, is building back better for the next 4, 5, 6 years. And Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves just don't really fit into that. As much as everyone in Chicago would love to have them around forever, it's just really going to be tough. And I doubt the Blackhawks are going to want to pay them a premium. Like, I feel like both guys would have to take at least a little bit of a discount. No way Jonathan Taves is going to be making $10.5 million again. So there's just a whole lot of things that lead me to believe these two will be traded come deadline time. The wanting to go and win, or at least have an opportunity to win somewhere else, again, it looks like they're not going to be at least given that opportunity with the Blackhawks for a handful of years. So I feel like the fiery competitor in them is, at the end of the day, going to trump anything else. And they haven't come close to even sniffing a Stanley Cup since 2015. It's been a long time, 7 years now. And unfortunately, the Blackhawks weren't able to keep it together long enough for them. They did their parts, and I wouldn't blame them if they wanted to go elsewhere. They have earned the right to do whatever they want to do, as tough as that may be. And to me, it feels like that's going to be asking the Blackhawks to move them. But again, this is just a shot in the dark. I'm completely guessing here. We don't have any updates from them, and I don't think we'll have any till probably January or February at the very earliest, Eddie.
Real quick, is there any rumors? Is Patrick Kane maybe looking to go back to a team like Buffalo? Obviously, he's from there. They're a team that's kind of on the rise, maybe looking for a veteran leader to come in and help them get them, push them across the finish line a little bit. They're off to a good start. Is that a rumor out there people have mentioned?
I haven't heard anything too concrete, but obviously the Buffalo connections are there with Kaner being from there. And I think if that team, I will say, if the Kane to Buffalo rumors, I personally feel like that's only going to be serious if Buffalo shows they can take, like, I don't want to say a massive step this year, but clearly they're heading in the right direction and they've looked good early on. I just feel like he wouldn't go there unless he's guaranteed to have an opportunity to win. And I feel like they're still a little early on in that process right now. So I've always, taken the Patrick Kane to Buffalo rumors with a grain of salt. I don't even know if he'd want to go back there. There was a lot of stuff that happened to him in Buffalo when he was a young man that didn't do him or his reputation very good. So he kind of has an interesting relationship with Buffalo. So I don't know about that. The one team that's always made the most sense to me would be the New York Rangers, if they would be able to make it work. Reuniting him and Artemi Panarin, I think, would be absolute magic. And it's a shame that they only got to play 2 seasons together, I believe it was. That feels like the best spot, but there's a lot that's going to go into it. The financials, Kane having the no movement clause and having the final say at the end of the day. The Blackhawks are going to have to be accepting the return. It's going to have to be good enough. There's a lot that's going to go into it. So there's really nothing simple about this matter, Eddie. But we really have no idea at this point, and just kind of got to see how it unfolds later on in the year.
Fair enough.
All right, you ready to get into segment 3, some keys to victory and predictions for tonight's matchup?
Absolutely.
All right, what do you got for the Los Angeles Kings? We've already talked about an up and down 6-6 start. They've had some good wins, haven't been able to string much together so far. What are some keys for the Kings to come into the United Center and come away with 2 points tonight?
I think one thing is get off to a good start. Believe it or not, they have had 4 games this year where they have allowed the first goal to be scored on the first shot by the opposition. And it almost happened again the other day as well. So I don't know. And there have been games where they've dominated the first period and then they've allowed the first goal, the other team first shot goal. Detroit did it, Nashville did it, Pittsburgh did it. I'm trying to think there was another way. It's unbelievable. So, and it's obviously very deflating, especially when you're playing better than the other team. And then you look up at the scoreboard and you're trailing. So I would say one key for the Kings, get off to a good start. Don't allow an early goal. Get the special teams working. The power play has looked a lot better. The puck movement that they have this season compared to last season on both the first and the second units have been much better. So special teams, as far as the power play, get that. If they can get that going early, that would be a plus as well. I would say also just the defensive coverage all the way around, not giving up odd man rushes, not giving up breakaways, obviously, not putting your goaltender in a bad situation. So I think a good early start for the Kings, if they can get a special teams goal, that would help as well, kind of get them into the rhythm of things. Just good, solid defensive hockey. If the Blackhawks score a goal because, they made a great play or maybe some puck luck, whatever, fine. But just don't give up glaring odd man rushes and breakaways and things where you're making it easier on your opponent.
I thought the Blackhawks had some issues with their starts. They've only scored the first goal twice through their first 10 games, but 4 times on the first shot, that's got to be some record of some sort. I don't know if I've heard about that. That's insane.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable, really, that would be the case. But I don't know what the record is, but I don't think I want to know what the record is because I'm afraid the Kings, they got a lot of hockey left for that to happen a few more times this season.
Out of sight, out of mind. We won't talk about it any longer. My keys for the Blackhawks tomorrow night, it looks like Arvid Soderblom is going to be making his 4th career NHL start. The Blackhawks are super banged up, not even at just the NHL level, as an organization in net right now. They're down Peter Mrazek and Alex Stalock in the NHL level right now. And their backup at the AHL level got injured over the weekend too. So the Blackhawks were actually forced to sign like their 5th or 6th string goaltender to an NHL deal because they're so limited right now. Looks like they're going to be leaning on Arvid Soderblom for these next few games. And he's looked good for the most part. I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do at a young age. But I think it's a really big key for the Blackhawks defense to tighten down the hatchet in front of them. I thought they did a really solid job of that against the New York Islanders on Tuesday when Soderblom had to come in for Stalock in relief. He only faced 4 or 5 really dangerous chances from the Islanders. If the Blackhawks can limit the Kings offensively, make life easier on their young netminder, I think that goes a long way for them ending their current losing skid. I also think it's really key for the Blackhawks for what's going well right now to stay hot. The second line of Philip Kurashev, Jonathan Toews, Taylor Radish has been phenomenal this year. I mentioned earlier, Jonathan Toews leads the Blackhawks with 6 goals. He's got points in 6 consecutive games. He's being dominant at the faceoff dot. His line's playing with the puck a ton in the offensive zone. Keep that line going. It's been really big for the Blackhawks offense this year. They only scored 6 goals in 6 preseason games, Eddie. Somehow they've been finding ways to score 4 or 5 a night to open up the year. So that's been a big part of it. And then also the power play has been tremendous. I don't know what got into them. It's been years since the Blackhawks have had a power play. Move the puck well, I think, is the biggest thing. We've had power play success, but the way this Blackhawks team is moving the puck on the power play has been really impressive. They struggled a bit on Tuesday against the Islanders, but to be fair, the Isles had only given up 1 shorthanded goal in their first 9 games coming into that one, and the Blackhawks still found a way to get one with the man advantage. So hopefully they can do that again here tonight because the power play and that secondary scoring has really helped this team stay competitive in some of these games to open up the year. So that's what I'm looking for out of the Blackhawks in this matchup tonight. Eddie, last thing before we get on out of here, what's your prediction for this one? Who you got and what's the final score?
Well, like I said, the Kings have been pretty up and down. So they were down against Dallas. So I'm going to predict they go up against Chicago. I'm going to say Kings win this one 4-2.
I would not be shocked if the Blackhawks continue this losing skid. Look, they've played good hockey, and I give them a ton of credit, but they are pushed as thin as it is right now. They're without their top defenseman, Seth Jones. I mean, Jack Johnson is leading the Blackhawks in time on ice right now when he's been down, and it's not a recipe for success. We got some youngsters on the blue line too. I know it's been a bit of a shaky start for the Kings, but I still believe this is a really intriguing and still playoff caliber team. I'm really intrigued by the Kings' youth that they have coming up and the future of what this team could be. I always am jealous and envious of those teams that find a way to stay competitive, yet I know there were a couple tough years there for the Kings, but now it seems like they found a way to be competitive and are still having some guys just step onto the scene. So that's where the Blackhawks hope to be in a couple years, Eddie, but I'm going with the Kings in this one. I think it's going to be a little bit more low scoring. I'm going out of the blue. The Blackhawks have had a lot of high scoring games. I just don't think that's going to keep up. I'm going 3-1 Los Angeles in this one. Unfortunately, the Blackhawks lose 5 in a row, but they stay competitive. And again, we may not want the wins. Us Blackhawks fans might want them to start losing. I don't know. It's a really wild and wonky year, Eddie.
Yeah.
That's just hockey. That's just how it is sometimes. But looking forward to this matchup again. The first of, I think the Blackhawks, they play the Kings twice here in a week. They'll be in Los Angeles next Thursday to start a West Coast road trip. So I'll message you. Maybe we can get together if you've got the time for it. But I appreciate you coming on the show tonight ahead of this matchup, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, always great to talk to you. I know we talked earlier about Andreas Anthony in the offseason. He had an amazing goal the other day. I thought of you when I saw that goal. I was like, I've told you, he's exciting. He's not that consistent, but he's exciting at times. That move. Wow, that was one of the better ones of his career. But it's always fun when the Blackhawks and Kings get together. Obviously, there's some history there in the recent past, and to see those two jerseys out on the ice together is always kind of fun. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And before we go real quick, it's hilarious how on par you've been with Andreas Athanasiou through this start. There are moments where, he'll score that goal and you're like, we know what he can do. He's a special player. And then there's nights where he literally looks like he's the worst guy out on the ice and can't make a pass. And you're like, dude, what'd you have to eat pregame? It's just been funny, the roller coaster ride that he's had. It was a perfect projection, I will say, when we spoke over the summer.
Yeah, like I said, that was an elite move. You don't see a lot of guys make that move. If he could do that consistently, he'd be a very rich man. But that's the problem. But he is still fun to watch. Every once in a while, he'll do something that really wows you.
No doubt about it. The speed is always fun to watch. Well, I think that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Kings. Again, thank you to everyone out there for making the show your first listen here to start your day. Now, for your second listen, be sure to go and check out Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.